Hello, everybody. Welcome to Web Yeshiva. This is the final class in a series of classes on the Haggadah, and I was fortunate enough to get the very last class right before everybody falls asleep in the middle of the night at the end of the Seder. So I'm theoretically going to be speaking about Nirtzah, which is actually about 4 or 5 different songs, but I'm going to cheat and just speak about one of them because they only gave me a picture of a kid. And also because I'm from New Zealand, and so I like small white animals. Let's talk about Nirtzah and Gadya. And if you have questions, please write away. And yes, okay. So let's first of all, what is Nirtzah? What does the word Nirtzah mean? It's the same as we say in Avodah, in the end of the Amidah, we say Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu. We've finished the bakashot, the questions of the Amidah, not the questions, the requests from God of the Amidah. And now we come to the end and we say, we hope what we said was acceptable, was pleasant, was found favor in your eyes. So Nirtzah is the same word as Ritzei. Whoever wrote this commentary, which I couldn't find who wrote it, says that having done the Haggadah, we are now acceptable before God, and so we have been accepted. Our Haggadah, our Seder, our Yetziat Mitzrayim has been accepted. We've left Egypt, and now we're saved. And the bit they don't tell you in primary school is that kind of everything else after this is actually optional extras, but what would a good Seder be without Who Knows One and Gadya? You wouldn't know it's time to go to bed without it. Gadya, one kid. The earliest appearance of Gadya, I believe, is in the Prague Haggadah of 1526, although I saw somewhere else that said actually it was the Prague Haggadah of 1590 was the first time. At any rate, the first time it appears in print, it appears both in Aramaic and in Yiddish, not in English, obviously, because in 1526 they weren't speaking this kind of English. But this was in Prague, where they spoke Yiddish, and it's unclear whether the original Gadya was Aramaic, which was translated to Yiddish, or the original Gadya was Yiddish, which is translated into Aramaic. I say that for a couple of reasons. I guess I say that mainly because the Yiddish, as far as I know, is correct, whereas the Aramaic has quite a few grammatical errors in it. For example, ata shunra, the cat comes, and the cat is a feminine noun, but ata shunra is the masculine. And then by the end, the person who wrote in Aramaic seems to give up on the Aramaic, and instead of saying, he talks about ata hashochet, right? The shochet, he doesn't say the tabcha, I think it would be in Aramaic. He's got the malach hamavet, which is the Hebrew word for the angel of death, and a kodesh baruch hu instead of kudsha brichu. So he doesn't even seem to make the effort there. So the Aramaic of Gadya is not good Aramaic. I guess also we always say, I think we say Dizban Abba, that my father bought for Trey Zuz. But if you look, I don't know if you can see, it's too small, but in the original versions to Zabin Abba Bitrei Zuz, he sold the kid for 2 zuz. So now we'll see some of the explanations of Gadya, in fact, talk about God selling the goat, or the father selling the goat rather than buying. Some Haggadahs, most Haggadahs, I think, switch it now so that it's more accurate, and that it's the father buying the goat, the kid. So it's unclear. I'm not saying that one's a typo, but I think it's definitely a misunderstanding. I don't think many people say this about the father selling the kid for 2 zuz. And I suppose in a sense, if he did sell the kid for 2 zuz, who cares what happened to it next? It's only an interesting story if the father bought his kid a kid for 2 zuz, and then he's very upset when the cat comes along and eats it. So therefore, perhaps it was originally a song in Yiddish, which was translated into Aramaic so that it could have a place at the Seder. Now, there's the Jewish Encyclopedia, for example, and following that Wikipedia suggests that actually there were German and French stories that were very similar, songs that were very similar, and the Jews of the time absorbed that the nursery rhymes, like we have, the old lady who swallowed a fly, and then a spider that wriggled and jiggled and tickled inside her, and it kept going till she swallowed the horse. So there were those kinds of poems, of songs, nursery rhymes, going back from hundreds of years ago. It's unclear to me. I couldn't find for sure whether Chad Gadya predates the other versions they're based on it, or whether they predate Chad Gadya. We know that Chad Gadya was printed in 1526 or perhaps 1590. The earliest versions of these other ones I could find were much later. The French version, Biquette ne veut pas sortir du chou, the nanny goat won't get out of the cabbage patch. And I'm not going to read it all to you in French, and in fact, I just shortened it. Now, the earliest printing of this I found was in the 1923. But you'll see it's quite similar, although also a little bit different than Chad Gadya, right? You'll get out Nanny, you'll get out of that cabbage patch. They sent for the dog to bite Nanny. The dog won't bite Nanny. Nanny won't get out of the cabbage. They sent for the wolf to eat the dog. So we've left out the cat, because how can a cat eat a kid? Anyway, let the dog eat the kid. And then if you have a dog, you need a wolf to eat the dog. Okay, fine. But the wolf won't eat the dog won't bite Nanny won't get out of the cabbage, etc., etc. By the end, they sent for the butcher to kill the calf. The butcher won't kill the calf won't drink the water won't put out the fire won't burn the stick won't stun the wolf won't eat the dog won't bite Nanny won't get out of the cabbage patch. So the order of events, the sequence of who's doing what to whom, is almost identical to what we have in Chad Gadya, but the major difference is that in Chad Gadya, all these things do happen, and in this French version about the cabbage patch, that none of these things happen. They tried to get all of these things to happen, and at the end, the kid is still in a cabbage patch until the very last line. They sent for the devil to take the butcher, and the devil agrees to take the butcher. Well, the butcher says, hang on a second. The butcher then agrees to kill the calf agrees to drink the water agrees to put out the fire agrees to burn the stick agrees to stun the wolf agrees to eat the dog agrees to bite Nanny agrees to get out of the cabbage patch. So at the end of the story, right, now it makes sense why we keep going back to the beginning, because nothing's actually happened until they invoke the devil, whereas we obviously invoke God. But in Chad Gadya, if the cat's already eaten the kid, then why do we keep talking about the kid every line, one after the other? Because it's in the past tense. This version, none of the animals or people or inanimate objects do what they're supposed to do until the devil gets involved, and all of a sudden they have a change of heart. So again, I don't know what's based on what, but there's a very strong parallel between this French nursery rhyme and Chad Gadya, and also a parallel between the Bauer schicht den Jokel aus, right? The farmer sends the yokel out. He wants to get him to go and work. The farmer wants the yokel to cut the oats. And yokel, I don't know whether, I think the yokel means the guy, the peasant who's supposed to do this job. But in English, obviously, a yokel is a country bumpkin. Can I say that? I'm not sure if that's anyway. But that is purely coincidental. So yokel doesn't want to cut oats. He prefers to stay at home. So the farmer sends the servant out to fetch the yokel. Servant doesn't want to fetch the yokel. So you see also in this German version, nobody does anything until the very end, when everybody all of a sudden does their thing. So the farmer sends the dog to bite the farmhand. The dog doesn't want to bite the servant. The farmer sends the cudgel to eat the dog. The stick doesn't want to hit the dog. The farmer sends the fire to burn the stick. The fire won't burn the stick. The farmer sends the water to put out the fire. The water doesn't put out the fire. Fire sends the oxen to drink the water. The oxen drink the water. The farmer, I use Google Translate for this, I think, so it's not exactly perfect English. The farmer sends the butcher to slaughter the ox. The butcher again, this is a very, very similar. There's just no cat in this version. Then the farmers, now's where it gets exciting. Sorry, this is the thing. The farmer sends the vulture to fetch the butcher. The vulture doesn't want to fetch the butcher. The farmer sends the witch to banish the vulture. The witch doesn't want to ban the vulture. The farmer sends the hangman. He's supposed to burn the hex. The hangman doesn't want to burn the hex. The farmer sends out the father. He's supposed to kill the hangman. Before I want to be killed, I want to burn the hex. Before I want to be burned, I want to ban the vulture. Before I want to be banned, I want to fetch the butcher. Before I have myself thought, I drink the water. Anyway, at the end of the day, Yokel goes and cuts the oats after all of these stages. So again, like the French version, the Germans, nobody wants to do anything until the very end when they all go and do what they're supposed to do. So it's the same, very, very similar until you get to the vulture and the witch and the hangman. It's a very similar sequence of events in both the German and the French and in Chad Gadya. But in Chad Gadya, everyone goes and does their thing and just keeps doing it over and over again. Whereas in these other nursery rhymes, nobody does anything until the final line, and then everything is sorted out and done the way it was supposed to be. So lest you think I am mocking Chad Gadya or saying that it's just a nursery rhyme and it was just borrowed from another culture and it's not intrinsically Jewish, that is not at all what I'm saying. There was somebody in the 18th century who said such a thing, and he was put in cherem by his community. I don't know which community he was in, but he complained about being put in cherem, or in fact, I think the community wrote to the Chidar Chaim Yosef David Azulai. They asked him, either they wrote to him or he was passing through town and they asked him. He says, Enosh. So they asked him if it was right to put somebody in cherem for mocking Chad Gadya, because at the end of the day, Chad Gadya is, even though it's Jewish and it's part of the Haggadah, it's not one of the principles of faith. It's not one of the a verse in the Torah. It's not not part of the main text of the Haggadah. So if somebody makes fun of the bits we just do at the end before the kids go to sleep, is that worthy of putting him in cherem, of excommunicating him? And the Chida said absolutely yes. Enosh zeh this man is mocking, is making fun of what tens of thousands of people in Poland and Germany do. So we see, by the way, this originated as a Polish-German custom. The Chida is Sephardi. This was not the Sephardi custom, but it was the widely accepted custom in kind of the Western/Eastern European countries. I'm sorry about the typos. That was me trying to copy the Hebrew and touch typing here. This is something that's been done for generations by the holiest of people. Each generation and its rabbis, they all said Chad Gadya. So he's mocking a Jewish tradition. He's mocking this minhag, which is a well-established and accepted minhag. V'hen od hayom lo alman Yisrael kama sheyishivot v'gani azman Hashem aleim yichyu. Not only were the regular people, the smart people doing it, but all these gaonim, all these tremendous, very wise sages also said Chad Gadya. So clearly, it is not something to be made fun of. Everybody, all of them said this piyut, this song. V'nimsa rash ze rasha, that should say rasha ze mitlonen brevavot Yisrael v'gdoleihem avot beit din v'gani eretz ashkenazim anushem makatov chayev nidu. So he's mocking, this wicked person is mocking tens of thousands of Jewish people and the greatest of among them, and his crime is almost a capital crime, and he certainly deserves to be put in excommunicated. And then, I've taken out a lot of this, but the Chida says, Kfar noda tokif gedulat piyutei Ashkenaz amiyusadim al chochma amitit. It's well known that the piyutim from Ashkenaz, these poems, these songs of Ashkenaz, of Germany, are based on true wisdom. Like the Arizal spoke about them. The author of the Rakeach said, the ideas contained within these apparently simple songs are very deep ideas that have been received as part of a tradition. Kabbalistic tradition, one person from the other. So the Chida does not explain what the Kabbalistic interpretation of Chad Gadya is, and I'm also not going to explain the Kabbalistic meaning of Chad Gadya. But he understands that if this is what the custom is, if this is what people are doing, then it definitely comes from a much deeper tradition, and it's not just a nursery rhyme or just an empty, meaningless song. So to be clear, I'm drawing parallels between Chad Gadya and kind of possibly contemporary cultural songs from around, and there may have been similar ideas in the air at the same time. But Chad Gadya is in a class of its own because it was the custom of the Jews of Poland and Ashkenaz. And nowadays, I think it's very widespread in almost all communities sing Chad Gadya. And it is based, according to the Chida, on deep Kabbalistic ideas. And as we'll see in a few slides on, there are many different interpretations of Chad Gadya. So I said that the Aramaic is not great, and I guess I'm asking a question here which I don't really have an answer to except for the obvious one, which is, why would you write? We've done the whole Seder. I understand. At the beginning, we talked about halachma anya. This is the bread of affliction. Anyone who wants to come and eat should do so, and anyone wants to, right? And that is in Aramaic. I don't know who gave the shir on that, but I'm sure that they addressed this issue. That's in Aramaic. Perhaps for two reasons. One is because that was the lingua franca, and it's an invitation to everybody to come and join in the Seder and the Korban Pesach with us. Although, of course, we only say that once we've come home and locked the door. And if it was Korban Pesach, it's too late for them to join the Korban Pesach because they have to be, chip in or say they're part of the Korban Pesach before it's slaughtered. But anyway, that's said in the vernacular because the message in theory is for for everybody to hear. And also perhaps there we intentionally don't want the angels to be involved because angels apparently don't speak Aramaic, and we intentionally don't want the angels to know the beginning of what's going on in the Seder, so that we don't get distracted and they don't get in the way and things like that. So perhaps Aramaic at the end is just a parallel to Aramaic at the beginning, but it still begs the question. This is not being said in Aramaic because we want the kids to understand or because this is the fun part, because in that case, all of Nirtzah should be in Aramaic. Also, it was almost certainly written, composed in a time when Aramaic was no longer the lingua franca because people were speaking. Its first edition was translated into Yiddish. So clearly people didn't understand the Aramaic. And furthermore, angels don't understand Aramaic. And we have the Gemara in Shabbat talks about Amar of Yehuda. A person, they can pray daven in any language they want, but they should not ask things for God in Aramaic. Anybody who does ask for things in Aramaic, the angels pay no attention to him. Because the angels don't understand Aramaic. I don't know why, but they don't understand Aramaic, and usually you need angels to carry your prayers to God, and therefore, if you're saying your prayers in Aramaic, the angels don't know their prayers, they won't go to God, so you're wasting your time. Now, I understand that Chad Gadya is not a prayer in that traditional sense, but why would we go out of our way to say it in a way that God's not going to hear us say it, right? If the angels can't transport that prayer, or at least that song or that idea to God, why are we saying in Aramaic? The Shulchan Aruch codifies this halacha. Right? A person may pray in any language they want. That is as a community in whatever country. In New Zealand, can pray in English or in Maori as a community. However, if you're praying by yourself, you're not part of a congregation, you may only pray in Lashon HaKodesh, which I've translated as Hebrew, even though perhaps means something different. That's opinion A in the Shulchan Aruch, that prayer must be in Hebrew unless it's a community where the entire community prays in a different language. Some say this only applies when you're asking for things from God. Kugon שיתפלל על חולה או על שום צער שיש לו בביתו. For example, if he's praying for a sick person or some kind of trouble in the house, and he's asking God for something, he can do. He must do it in Lashon HaKodesh, and not in the vernacular. But a prayer which is a communal prayer, which is established, like it's a set communal prayer, then an individual may say that in any language, and which is the halacha, right? That if somebody doesn't speak Hebrew, they may pray in English or French or German or whatever language they understand. And then he has a third opinion. Even an individual, actually, this I guess is also the halacha. Even an individual who's praying for a sick person is not praying a set prayer from the Seder. He's asking for his own private needs. He can pray in any language he wants, except for Aramaic. And even this most lenient opinion says you may not pray in Aramaic. So I'm asking the question of why Chad Gadya is in Aramaic. I guess the obvious answer is we're not asking for anything. It's just there purely for entertainment value. But then why are we saying it? Why did the people living in Prague who spoke Yiddish better than they spoke Aramaic, why did they write it in Aramaic? Perhaps, again, it's to have an ABA structure to the Haggadah, to begin with Aramaic and end with Aramaic. I'm open to any suggestions if you have any, or perhaps at your Seder, when everyone's about to fall asleep, you can begin a lengthy discussion around the table to discuss why this is in Aramaic rather than in Hebrew. All of the other prayers of Nirtzah are in songs, piyutim of Nirtzah are in Hebrew. So I don't really have an answer. I'm raising that as a question. So now I would like to go through for the next half hour or so, go through. There's many explanations of Chad Gadya. I'd like to go through three of them, 3.5. Because this shir is 2 hours earlier than it usually is, I didn't have time to type out the Hebrew for all of them. And for some of the translations, I relied on Kenneth Brander, who gave an excellent shir on Chad Gadya. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden explains Chad Gadya as the journey of the soul from the spiritual world into the physical world. And he said, I started typing in Hebrew. Chad Gadya neshama nimshelet ligdi. The soul is like a kid. Lefi shelo tikach machmedet olam hazeh me'uma rak me'at meruch ne'aseh. And since the soul should not take too much, this is why it's like a kid. The soul should not desire too much from the physical world. It should only take a small amount of the spirituality. Kigdiyah, like a kid. Shemachalom at mimine habahemot afil mitzleh. The kid eats less than all the other animals, even less than a lamb or a sheep. Vehi yechida bein evrei haguf harabim. And it is I think this means the soul is a unique thing amongst the many parts of the body, just like a kid is unique amongst all the other animals. So Dezabin Abba, Rabbi Yaakov understands that father is selling the kid, that God sold the soul, or Masrala Adam la sod ba'ketzon, he gave it, the soul, to the person to do with it as he wanted. Mitrei zuzim, with 2 zuz, lama nikrim zuzim. Right? He doesn't understand that zuz means an amount of money, but rather shezazin mim koman. It moves from its place, right? I guess also money is called currency, or wait, there's another word that I can't remember. Right? Money moves from place to place, but the word zaz means to move. So it moves twice. There's two stages of movement from where the soul starts until it gets to earth inside a person. It starts off in the world of angels, and it moves from there. Then it moves into the world of reincarnations. Until it is then sold completely and comes into this lowly physical dwelling place. If anyone has any questions or thoughts or ideas, please feel free to write them in the chat, because otherwise it's just me talking for a very long time. So then the cat comes. why, if you ask, why should I cry that the soul came into the world? Right? God, the soul's father, sold it. So why should I care more than God about the well-being of the soul? And God put the soul in the world so that its true brilliance, its greatness could be seen, displayed amongst the lowly physical things. Wait, somebody's written somebody. Yes, these slides are available on WebYeshiva. I just uploaded them as a PDF. If you go to the shir, they should be there now. They weren't there 2 minutes before the class started, but they should be there now. What's so bad about the soul that it is so bitter and so sad? So the answer is, how can I not cry and clap hands, but not in a happy way? This gentle, delicate soul is sitting with bright, shining light, and v'dimata ma'en hafuga, its tears are flowing. Ki lo daish she'nafla mishamayim aretz. Not only, it's not bad enough, as if it weren't bad enough that the soul fell from heaven to earth. That's now gone further, fallen even further in the physicality of the physical world. The cat comes. I like this comparison of a newly born child, a newly born soul, is compared to a cat. Why? Because the shunra, ta'ev lekol ma'achal, cat will eat anything. And if people look away from the cat, titrof v'tafsida ma'achal, the cat will get into everything, eat it, and ruin the food. Kain nar katan, so to a baby that's been born, or a small child, it wants to eat everything it sees. If the parents look away for a minute, then the child will get used to bad ways, and bad ways. And then the body will eat and the soul will get destroyed. So the cat represents the desires of the world. And then I ran out of time to type the Hebrew, so we're doing the rest just in English. And again, this is Rabbi Kenneth Brander's translation. The dog came and ate the goat. If a child is not trained to embrace transcendental value, it will grow up to be like a dog whose desires are never satiated. Our desires will continue to run contrary to the ideals of the soul and will destroy the environment of our soul. Woe is the soul which is housed in an unredeemed body. Dezabin Abba, right? The Father soul, our Father God, entrusts us with this precious commodity, the soul. Perhaps as the child matures into an adult, he will remember the covenant between God and the Jewish people, causing a mending of his ways and a change in his gestalt. You can tell that's not my translation, because I would never use the word gestalt. I'm not smart enough. Then came the stick that beat the dog and ate the goat. If a child grows up with his desires unchallenged, then these behaviors will become ingrained, beaten into his psyche, and his attitude will not change. These deviant behaviors will act like a weapon, a stick, beating and destroying the internal spirit of the soul, Dezabin Abba, which our Father God entrusted to us. Then came a fire and burned the stick that ate the goat. The behavior will continue and create burning passions and desires, which preclude any type of personal redemption. Fantasies and desires will burn a spiritual hole in the inner recesses of ourself. Sinful desires will intensify until it will totally destroy the soul, Dezabin Abba, which our Father God entrusted to us. Perhaps when we are senior in our years, our passions and behaviors which deviate from the norms and morals of the Torah will automatically reform and allow our tormented soul to rise up from the shackles of impurity. The water comes and quench the fire that ate the goat. The soul will not automatically escape. For a person who has embraced a lifestyle which is the contrary to Torah values will have crushed and drowned the soul. Dezabin Abba, which our Father God entrusted us. Then came the ox which drank the water that ate the goat. One must struggle to redeem oneself. One that does not and believes it will happen on its own automatically is condemned to be a shor muad. That should be the word, right? That an ox who causes damage intentionally. An individual not willing to work on self-redemption will continue to wallow in behavior which will destroy the spirit of the soul, Dezabin Abba, which our Father God entrusted to us. And finally, if I can turn the page, then came the slaughterer and slaughtered the ox that ate the goat. Our rabbis relate that with every sin, a destructive force in the world is created. A lifestyle devoid of values creates a slaughterer, a destructive force that will persecute and inflict punishment on those involved in sinful ways. These afflictions will torment the soul, Dezabin Abu, which our Father God entrusts to us. Then came the angel of death and slew the sorter, they ate the goat. When the angel of death will remove the soul, the deviant lifestyle will cause it to contain impurities. Woe to such a soul, Dezabin Abba, which our Father God entrusted to us. Then came the Holy One, blessed be He, and smote the angel of death, they ate the goat. When God examines the soul in heaven, do not think that in God's presence the soul will automatically achieve purification. For purification of the soul and redemption of self can only be achieved in this world. It is in the world of experience that growth and self-perfection may be achieved. Woe is the soul that has not had the opportunity to struggle for greatness and to achieve perfection, the Zabin Abu, which our Father God entrusted to us. That is Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Seder Shar Shamayim, Shar Shamayim or Beit Yaakov, volume 2. He's got the Haggadah and a commentary on it. That's what he says there. I guess my question on this is, so the journey of the soul from in heaven down to earth, the whole life cycle, and then back up to heaven again. Great, I see it all works. Why is this the last thing we say at the Seder? Why would the message of the soul, and I guess the Musar, the teaching of being a good person, why is that something that we would want to talk about in coded language at the very end of the Seder when we're supposed to be celebrating free? Oh, wow. Who says that? What a great answer. I can't see who said that. Leah, wow. I love that answer, which is certainly true in Chutzlatz on the second day of second Seder. Not quite true in Israel, but near enough. So the beginning of Sfirat HaOmer, I love that answer. Fantastic. I hadn't thought of that at all. Right. So in a sense, Sfirat HaOmer is a Chad Gadya, then will be preparing us after Pesach in the lead up to Shavuot to perfect ourselves so we can receive the Torah. And just like the 7 weeks of Sfirat HaOmer, every day we perfect a different midah and we work on ourselves and perfect ourselves so we can receive the Torah. So Chad Gadya reminds us that Pesach is in the end. We haven't, even though we've left Egypt and we've gone out of Egypt, it's just the beginning of the journey. And we have to take care of our soul and make sure that we will behave appropriately and from day one, right, train ourselves in the right meaning. That's a really, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I really love that answer. That I had not. Anyone else got any fantastic answers, or even not such fantastic answers? So I was thinking much more pragmatically that. Well, actually, no. I was going to say Rav and Shmuel. We know that when we say the Haggadah, we have to begin with Gnai, with something bad, and with Shvach, with something good. And Rav and Shmuel disagree about what it means to begin with something bad and end with something good. Does it mean, which I think is what most people expect and imagine, the badness that we were slaves in Egypt, and the good is that God took us out of Egypt at the end of the slavery. That is the kind of simple reading, and that is one version of the Haggadah, and we do say that version of the Haggadah. But the other version, which I believe is Rav, is that our ancestors were idolaters, and God has brought us out from idolatry, and we now worship one God. And we also have that version of the, oh, very nice, exactly, same kind of thing I'm saying here, that that the message of the Haggadah of Pesach is not primarily we were slaves and now we're free, but we were once idolaters and now we worship God. And if that's the message, all right, we do the Haggadah twice basically, right? We talk about Avadim Hayim Lefaro, V'Otzianu Misham, and Avdei Avodah Zarah Hayu Avotenu. So we do the whole story twice. And if the idolatry, from idolatry to worship of God is the message of the Haggadah, then it makes sense perhaps to end and say, good, we're worshiping God, but that comes with responsibility and making sure that we continue on that task and don't get sidetracked by the ways of the world and everything in it. Especially, ein maftirin achar Pesach havikoman, right? We're not allowed to eat anything at the stage of the Haggadah. We've already drunk the fourth cup and we said all the things, and we can't eat or drink anymore, but we can't eat anymore or drink anymore anyway because we're absolutely stuffed to the gills. And obviously this is when the least, when we're so stuffed and full, we can just about roll into our beds if we're lucky. And that's when we need to think about our souls as well, because we've just done exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, and sated ourselves. And well, I'll speak for myself. Sorry, obviously you guys not, but we've missed the entire message of the Seder, which is to get close to God, and we've just focused on this physicality. And so Chad Gadya, according to Rabbi Yaakov, ends and then comes to remind us about the spirituality a little bit too late, but at least it's a message to go to sleep on. So thank you for those great answers, and yes. And so I'm going to ask the same question at the end of this interpretation, which is from Jonas and Eibeshitz. If you came to my other classes, I've given a couple of different classes about the dispute between Rabbi Yaakov and Jonas and Eibeshitz. This is not now the time to rehash that, but I can't have one without the other. So Rabbi Yonason, in fact, wrote an entire book called Ma'amar Yonatan. It's a book of, I don't know, 25 pages or something. It is a commentary on Chad Gadya, an entire book on this, which is fantastic. And so in Ma'amar Yonatan, and again, I've taken this. I didn't have time to type out the Hebrew, and I didn't even have time to translate it, so it's not my translation. But here, Yonason is going to explain how Chad Gadya tells the entirety of Jewish history. So, Chad Gadya, the goat my father bought, which is the Jewish people that God bonded with, right? Two zuz means Avraham. There were two, the bond between Avraham and Brit Bein B'tarim, which is there's two covenants with Abraham, right? Brit Bein B'tarim, when Avraham cuts the animals in half and walks through the middle, and the fire and the torch go through the middle. So that shows that the Jewish people is hashgacha pratit, that God intervenes in nature to make sure that history unfolds as it should, and that is an unnatural way. And then when Yitzchak is born, then there's the Brit Milah, or before Yitzchak is born, and when Yitzchak is born, Brit Milah, which is sorry, he's Malam and Mazal, Malam and Teva. They're both supernatural, but one is kind of a national destiny, and one is an individual covenant. So the cat ate the goat means the Jews were enslaved by Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh is the cat. Cats, right? Again, I love. I'm not particularly a cat person, although I did once have a cat. But anyway, cats basically aren't interested in their owners. They do us a favor if they agree to live in our house and eat our food and shed all over our furniture. And that's the same as Pharaoh, who refused to recognize God. And it says, right, why should I listen to God? I don't know who God is. So Pharaoh is like the cat who comes and eats the kid, as it were, by enslaving the Jewish people and their national destiny. And the dog, that's the wrong heading on the top of the slide. It's Rabbi Yonason, obviously not Rabbi Yaakov. The dog ate the goat. This is Amalek. Right, so the dog does know who its owner is, and Amalek knew who God was, and yet, like a rabid dog, Amalek decides, nevertheless, to attack the Jewish people, and that is why Amalek is far worse than Egypt, because Egypt said, we didn't know what we were doing, but Amalek intentionally knew that they were trying to attack God and attack their master, and that is why Amalek is the ultimate in evil. The stick, right, is Moshe's staff, and when in the war against Amalek, Moshe held his hands up. Moshe held his hands up, held the staff up, and the Jewish people won. Then the fire came, which is the Mishkan, which then eventually became the Beit HaMikdash, and that Beit HaMikdash was ultimately destroyed by fire with Nebuchadnezzar, and then that's the first temple. We'll get to the second one in a second. So the fire comes and destroys the stick. So the stick of Moshe becomes the Mishkan, which becomes the Mikdash, which is then destroyed by the fire. And then water comes. Water is the Torah, because during Galut Bavel, in the exile between the first and the second temples, or I guess more specifically when the Jews started coming back, they were Jews by that point, when they started coming back to Israel, that is really the new commitment, right, to the Torah. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, that after the story of Esther, of the Purim story, the Jews accepted the Torah again, the Torah they'd accepted on Mount Sinai. They accepted it more fully and more completely than they had on Mount Sinai. So that's the water that extinguishes the fire which destroyed the temple, and the water of coming back to Egypt coming back to Israel allows them to rebuild the temple, to create the second temple. And practically speaking, for us nowadays, the men of the Great Assembly and the return to the second temple is kind of the very beginning of the halachic process that we use today. Anything before that, is part of Tanakh, and we don't learn halacha from Tanakh, right? We learn halacha from the traditions and interpretations, which the men of the Great Assembly were the first ones. No, it comes from Moshe Rabbeinu, but it was articulated, and the Mishnah kind of traces Pirkei Avot, goes from Moshe Sinai to the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and then that's when the beginning of the Mishnah and the Torah that we have today unfolds from there. And then the ox drinks the water. The ox is the Greeks, or who were the Jews and who were really Syrians, and the Hellenists were Syrians, and the people doing this were the Jews who rejected belief in God, praise in God, and they tried to destroy Torah, and they made the Jewish people reject Torah. So they're like the ox that drinks up all the water. And the slaughterer is the Chashmonaim, who killed the Mityavnim, the Greeks and the Jewish Hellenists, and I put the paragraph break in the wrong place. And so first of all, the Chashmonaim stood up like the Shochet and killed the bad guys, and then along came Herod, who wiped out the last of the Chashmonaim, and he was not fit for the role, and so therefore he was the wrong kind of. He wasn't a Shochet. He wasn't trained for the job, and so the angel of death destroyed Herod and Herod's temple, which is Titus, who destroyed the second temple, leading to the current exile. And then finally, at the end of the story, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and destroys the angel of death, that God promises that in the future he will undo Titus's actions and rebuild the temple, or the temple will be rebuilt, a third temple, and then we'll be able to return to how we were at the beginning. So I guess same question again. Why is this the message to end the Seder with? Which I think is possibly an easier, to me, an answer presents itself more quickly, but please write your thoughts on a piece of paper, fold it up and keep it hidden. No, anyone want to? I can't see if anyone, I can't tell if people are writing or not, but I'd love to hear why the history of the Jewish people from Avram Avinu through Egypt and the desert and the temple and the exile and then the temple and then the exile. Why is this the message that we say that we want to talk about at the very, very end of our Pesach Seder? I'm not sure if you're slow typists or no one wants to be brave enough. So, okay, I will say my thought, but please feel free because you probably have better, smarter thoughts than I do. We really, the real end of the Seder, if we exclude Nirtzah, which is this added on bit, the real end of the Seder is L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. That when we finish the Seder, we've talked about the redemption from Egypt, but we're supposed to experience the redemption from Egypt. We're not talking about something happened in the past. We're reliving ourselves this experience. And then we finish this whole Seder, and then we find ourselves sitting in the present day, and we're still enslaved. We're still not redeemed. We still haven't got the temple. And so we say, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. It's true that right now we're not there, but we have this belief in the future that we're on our path to get there. And therefore, the Exodus, the redemption from Egypt, is still a continuing path. And that's therefore what Chad Gadya is telling us, that we're on this path. And despite everything that's happened, despite the fact that we're sitting here right now, and it feels like the Malach HaMavet is running riot and everything's destroyed and we're in a bad place, we have a promise and a guarantee that at the end of the day, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to come and redeem us. And somehow the Chad Gadya is still going to be the Gadi, who's the Jewish people, or the promise to Avram is still around even at the end of that. So I think to me that kind of fits in a bit more intuitively with the ideas of the end of the Seder that we have with the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, or Yerushalayim Habnuya. So Moshe, the Chasam Sofer, I think he has more than one commentary on Chad Gadya, but I liked this one where he goes through and Chad Gadya retells everything we didn't say, because the one thing that's really missing from the Seder as it is in our books, the thing that's really missing from that is actually the story of leaving Egypt, right? We interpret all the verses and play around with all sorts of things and talk about a whole bunch of things, but what we don't do is open up Chumash Shemot and read about the slavery and about leaving Egypt and about the things. So Chad Gadya, according to the Chasam Sofer, tells the story of leaving Egypt, and this is my translation. And also, no, it's not my Hebrew. I copied this from the internet. Chad Gadya Avram Avinu made two journeys, right? Lech Lecha, he came from Eretz Yisrael, from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, that's Lech Lecha. And then when there was a famine in Israel, twice he went from Israel down to Egypt, right? So he made two journeys. And because of the first journey to come to Israel, God promised him an eternal covenant and bond. And because of the second journey, as Ramban explains, God said, he's he was not reenacting, pre-enacting. Avram was going through the motions of things that his children would have to go through. So when Avram went down to Egypt, that meant the Jewish people also had to go down to Egypt as well. So that's the Gadi, right? So the Jewish people are like a Gadi, and there's two ways in which they're like a Gadi. The Gadi is because of their greatness. It's a Ser Tamim, a pure sheep, pure lamb. That sounds a bit Christian, doesn't it? Anyway, a Ser Tamim is a pure holy thing, and the other thing is a sheep about to be shorn, is abandoned in a sense. I don't know if you've ever seen sheep being sheared, but they take all their clothes off and chuck them away. So a sheep can be the highest and it can be the lowest, and this is Avram coming to Israel and leaving Israel. So that's why we say Chad Gadya twice. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. One is the positive side and one is the negative side, right? The two actions of Abba here is Avram Avinu. His two actions of coming to Israel and leaving Israel. I guess Zuz here also means that he moved in the same way that the Rabbi Yaakov Engine explained it. And so that's what we're talking about here. The greatness of coming to Israel and the badness of leaving Israel. The cat, I'm going to run out of time, aren't I? Anyway, the cat refers to Paro, who, like Rabbi Yonasan said, didn't recognize God. So I don't know who God is, just like the cat doesn't recognize its owner. Then the dog. The dog comes and bites the cat. The dog, in this case, is the Jewish people, who are crying out from their from the suffering of the persecution of the slavery, and they can't even articulate their ideas or their thoughts. They're just crying out in the same way that a dog just howls or barks without articulating any kind of clear thing. And nevertheless, God heard their cries and agreed he was going to take them out and bit the cat, which is Paro. The staff comes along. The staff comes the first time. That's Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of Parshat Shemot and says, God, I'm not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to go and tell Paro to let the people go, and he's going to listen to me. And in fact, what happens is not that, but the Paro said, get out of here. You guys have got it too light. It's too easy for you. I'm going to make you work twice as hard. And the Egyptians, he put overseers, or the Egyptians were beating up the Jewish supervisors or policemen or whatever. So the stick here is Paro hitting the Jews after Moshe's failed attempt to take them out of Egypt. And then the fire comes along. The fire, says Chasam Sofer, is the first 9 plagues. As soon as the fire starts burning, they can't use the stick anymore. As soon as the first plague started, that was the end of slavery. Even though they were in Egypt for another year, just about, the slavery ended when the first plague began. Then the water came and put out the fire. So water either is something which flows from higher to lower and refers to humility, right? The rabbis say, and ma ma'menichim makom gavoa v'chim lemakom namuch kach Torah, adam shafel or something like that. That Torah always goes to someone who's humble, just like water flows downwards, so too the Torah does. That's one kind of water. The other kind of water is tempestuous, stormy water, which kills people. And so each of the plagues had both those aspects. When the plague was at its height, Paro all of a sudden became very humble and said, "I'm really sorry. I want to let the Jews go. Please stop the plague." He says to Moshe, "That's enough." As soon as the plague finished, then he became Zadon again. He willfully said, or hardened his heart, whatever, willfully said, "I'm not going to let the Jewish people go." So each time he had the cycle of water of the humility, and then Mayim Zdonim. The ox that comes to drink the water. This is a little known fact that after the 9th plague, Moshe said to Paro that I'm going to kill all the firstborn, or God's going to kill all the firstborn. Now, in the newspapers, this was newsworthy, so the newspapers printed up that all the firstborn are going to die, and all the firstborn reading the newspaper weren't very happy about this for some reason, and they said, "Listen, we can't go on like this. We know this Moshe fellow is not messing around," and so the firstborn Egyptians fought against the other Egyptians, saying, let the Jews go, because otherwise we're going to die. And the Midrash says that in fact the firstborn Egyptians killed thousands of other Egyptians in an attempt to save their own lives and let the Jews go. And that's why we say in Tehillim, it says L'makem Mitzrayim bivchoreihem, that God smote the Egyptians with their firstborn. It's not that he smote the firstborn, but the firstborn were doing the smiting of the other Egyptians. So that's the ox coming and fighting against the water, right? The water is Paro changing his mind all the time. That's the ox. Ata shochet, and then the shochet here means actually the shochet comes and they shechted their korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. And as a result of that shechita, that night they put the blood on the doorposts, and that night was when please, I don't know whose phone that is, whatever. Anyway, that's when the firstborn died as a result of the shochet of killing the korban Pesach. Ata malach hamavet, but now things take a nasty turn. The malach hamavet here refers to the Yetzer Hara, right? Well, malach hamavet hu Satan hu Yetzer Hara. And so as soon as the Jews were out, as soon as they've left Egypt behind, the Yetzer Hara comes and they start testing God. Es nisyanot nisu avotenu bamidbar, and from then until now, we're still suffering from the malach hamavet, the Yetzer Hara, that's trying to mislead us and waylay us, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and shechs the malach hamavet like he did at Har Sinai when there was a time before the sin of the golden calf at Har Sinai. The Jewish people were free from sin and free from the Yetzer Hara. So that's the Kadosh Baruch Hu shechs the malach hamavet, and then each time it goes back to the beginning to teach us that even though it looks as though the cat ate the kid, even though it looks as though Paro destroyed Avram Avinu or the Jewish people, really it turns out the kid is still there at the very end, and the final line, or the end of Chad Gadya, everyone else is dead or beaten or burned or swallowed or drunk or whatever, except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's killed the Malach HaMavet and the one kid, which is the Jewish people. So now I don't have to ask the question. It makes sense that we've just finished telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So Chad Gadya retells that story in a child-friendly way about leaving Egypt. I just want to end or start the end with Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz's riddle, or a riddle attributed to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. And I haven't got very much time, but I'll just say it very quickly then. If we assume that the kid is the good guy in the story, the little goat who's the president, or he's been bought or he's sold, he's the good guy, that means that the cat who bites him is the bad guy. Now, if the cat's the bad guy, that means the dog that bit the cat, the dog is doing a good, he's right to bite the cat because the cat's bad, so the dog's punishing him. But that means if the dog is good, then the stick that hit the dog is bad, and that means the fire is good, that means the water is bad, and that means it ends up that God is on the wrong side here, right? It means that God was wrong to kill the Malach HaMavet. That's the riddle that Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz asked when they were busy. That he was in an inn and they were discussing the machlokes and Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and he wanted to show that he's smarter than everyone else. So he said this riddle and opened it up to he said, I know the answer, but does anyone else know the answer here? So if you look on Chadrei Charedim, which is a Haredi website, they say, well, of course he thought God was wrong because he was a Sabbatean anyway, which is exactly the opposite of the message you're supposed to get from this. I haven't got time to give you an answer. I'll leave you to think about that. Maybe you can ask it at your Seder. I was just going to say a modified version of that question, and then perhaps give my own answer. So the question I would ask is not so much right, wrong, flipping, but each animal or thing or person in the story did what they're supposed to do. I mean, well, I don't know if cats really eat kids, but let's pretend if the dogs bite cats, at least in not Tom and Jerry, whatever it is. That's what they're supposed to do. And sticks are for hitting dogs, and fire burns wood, and what each thing is doing what it's supposed to do. The shochet comes in at the end of the story. He doesn't even know what happened, why this cow is here, and that it's drunk the water that put out the fire. He says a bracha, he shechs the cow, he does everything he's got to do to make this food kosher and give it to people to eat for Yom Tov. He's done a huge mitzvah, he spent years studying. He does this thing, and what's his reward? The angel of death comes and cops him on the head, and he's gone. The angel of death's not doing anything. His job is to go and kill people. I mean, not kill, whatever. That's his job. So why is God shechting each stage of the way? It's not only that this is what they do, but they have no way of even knowing that they're not doing the right thing they're supposed to. And in fact, what they think they're doing is a mitzvah. That's the question. I think, to me, that question, which I guess I only thought about that question this year when I was preparing this year. And I think the question is probably better than my answer. But the answer I'd like to give in the last few seconds of this year is that we've just spent however many hours at Seder telling the story of the good guys and the bad guys. The Egyptians are terrible, and the more stuff we say bad about them, let's not give them 10 plagues. That's not enough. Let's give them 50 plagues. How about 200? Let's give them 250 plagues. They're such bad guys. Let's give them more and more plagues. And the Jewish people are better and better and better and better. The bad guys are really bad and the good guys are really good. And we've just spent hours and hours talking about who's good and who's bad. And it's very simple and very, very obvious. And everything's very black and white. And then Chad Gadya maybe brings us back into the real world. And actually nothing is black and white, nothing is simple. And you may be thinking you're doing a mitzvah, and in fact that may be the worst thing you could be doing. You maybe think you're doing, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. What do you want from me? And in fact, I'm not saying that there's no rhyme or reason. The opposite. There is a plan and there is a rhyme or a reason. But sometimes we think we know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and we say, well, they deserve that. And in fact, Chad Gadya tells me, well, they may have deserved it, but there was no way that the person, unless they'd seen the entire story from beginning to end, nobody knew who's the good guy and who's the bad guy and who deserved what and who didn't deserve anything. And so I guess this is kind of the answer to the Rambam's question of why the Egyptians were punished when they were just doing the mitzvah. That God said they're going to enslave the Jewish people. Why did God then punish them for doing what they were supposed to do? And the Riva doesn't like Rambam's answer, right? But the reality, we've just been busy saying how terrible the Egyptians are, and they were, and how good the Jews are, and they are. But yet that's a far too simple story. And Chad Gadya tells us that there's many shades and colors in the story, and we don't always know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and we have to just try and do the best we can. That's it. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Thank you so much for joining me today in this class, and that's it. I'll be giving some classes, a series of 4 classes on lead up to Shavuot, about some people from the book of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi and David HaMelech, and maybe a few other characters as well. So look for that in the upcoming schedule. And that's it. Thank you very much. Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi Sedley.